Hello, my name is Darryl Roland, and I'm the music director here at St. Peter's Church. I'll be presenting a Lenten meditation on Choral Preludes by J.S. Bach and Johannes Brahms. But I want to first provide some insights on these compositions to help make your listening experience more meaningful. To begin with, a chorale is basically a hymn melody that has originated in the Protestant German church. And a choral prelude is an organ piece that is based on a chorale. The first choral prelude on today's program is When Adam Fell, the Human Race by J.S. Bach. This piece is one of the most famous preludes in the Orgelbuchlein, which translates into Little Organ Book. That's because this setting is so dramatic and shocking in its musical representation of the fall of the human race. Let's take a look at the musical symbolism found in this work. The most obvious and dramatic feature of this work is found in the pedal part. And the pedal part is found in the lowest staff of each system. Bach uses the largest dissonant interval of the seventh in all its forms, major, minor, and diminished, in a descending pattern to depict the fall of Adam. So here you can see it. Each descending seventh. And this occurs throughout the piece. And it sounds like this. Professor Russell Stinson points out that the diminished seventh was customarily associated with grief. Another musicologist, Charles Stanford Terry, describes the sequence of descending sevenths as a series of almost irremediable stumbles of the human race. And if I were to play all of these descending sevenths, I think you would get that feeling. The rests in the pedal part can be interpreted as the sighing of the spirit. Now, in contrast, the chorale melody is presented in the soprano line, here you can see it, in an unembellished and straightforward manner. So if you look here to the right, you'll see the chorale. And then here on the choral prelude, the German musicologist and theologian Ernst Erfgen interprets this as representing constancy in faith. Beneath the melody, the inner voices wind sinuously in an uninterrupted line of 16th notes, with a lot of chromaticism and representing the writhing of the snake. So, for example, if we take a look at the passage that is underlined in red, yeah, it looks and it kind of sounds like a snake writhing around. Another motif consisting of 5 notes presents fleeting modulations between major and minor tonalities, which heightens the sense of instability arising from Adam's fall. So these are denoted in green. So you have, my piano just stopped playing. Here we go, we'll try it again. So kind of from major going to minor. And so if you look throughout this piece, you see that that motive is everywhere. Now, interestingly enough, on the second half of the choral prelude, Bach inverts it. So it's going to go up now. And sometimes they'll overlap. So if you look where my cursor is, you have the motive going up, and then overlapping, you have it descending. Now, as Bach approaches the end of the final phrase, you see 3 consecutive descending sevenths in the pedal. Sounds like this. So it's not exactly your Jesu joy man's desiring or sheep may safely graze Bach that you may be more familiar with. But very dramatic, and he makes his point. But the chorale ends in major, symbolizing hope and redemption. We associate the text, "O sacred head sore wounded," with the next chorale melody. But the text that Brahms had in mind is a prayer for a blessed death and release from life's ills and woes. The chorale melody and Brahms' setting work well with the somberness of both texts in mind. This chorale melody was and is still available in two versions, rhythmic and isometric. To your left here, you have the rhythmic version consisting of more irregular and often syncopated rhythms of Reformation-era chorales around 1520 to 1550. The isometric version is found here on the right and is characterized by more regular patterns of mostly quarter notes and a few longer note values, and sounds like this. We associate the isometric style with chorale harmonizations of J.S. Bach. We can't be sure if Brahms was referring to the rhythmic or isometric version of this chorale when he composed this prelude. But regardless, the chorale melody is highly embellished here in contrast to the unembellished melody in Bach's setting of When Adam Fell. So take a look at this score. The notes that are circled in red are the exact notes of the chorale melody. And you can hear how Brahms embellishes it. Here's the first phrase. Now, when that phrase repeats, Brahms adds chromaticism to it and embellishes it a little bit more. So I'm starting right here where the cursor is. Chromaticism, more chromaticism, a lot more. In contrast to Bach's setting of our first chorale, Brahms does not employ musical motives that would symbolize specific passages of the chorale text. Instead, the gesture in the opening, second, and final phrase convey a confident and bold faith. So let's just listen to the opening of those phrases. And then the second phrase. And then finally the last phrase. Now, look at the third phrase. I'm going to scroll down. This phrase reflects a more intimate sense of joys eternal. So I'm going to start right there. Then the last phrase. It's sounding pretty Brahmsian, but that's not much of a surprise since it's arranged by Brahms. In Brahms' second setting of the same chorale melody, we can observe a close relationship to the chorale's text, "My heart is ever yearning." The entire verse reads, "My heart is ever yearning for blessed death's release, from ills that here surround me and woes that never cease. This cruel world to banish would be a blessed boon. I sigh for joys eternal. O Jesus, Lord, come soon." Brahms retains the original rhythmic style of the chorale melody and places it in the pedal where it is clearly stated and unembellished. Here, looking to the left, we have the original melody. And then here in the chorale prelude, here's the pedal part, the bottom staff, and it sounds like this, with the half note being changed to a quarter note. Regarding music symbolism, the most outstanding feature of this setting is the repeated eighth notes in the bass of the left hand. The only relief from this pattern comes in the third phrase, which contrasts from the first, second, and final phrases. These repeated notes are without question representing life's heartbeat. Only in the final phrase, Brahms directs the slowing down in tempo until a very broad adagio is reached in the last measure, with the heart beating ever more slowly and finally resting at its last beat. This is such a poignant moment. Take a look here at the very beginning. You can see the repeated notes. And these repeated notes continue all the way through this setting with a little bit of relief. You don't have it right here in the third phrase, but then returning at the very end. So I'm just going to play these last two measures. It's not as effective on the piano, but you'll hear the heartbeat slowing down. So here we go. We're going to now turn our attention to Bach's setting of When in the Hour of Utmost Need. The intimate devotional nature of the text is expressed through one of the most elaborate ornamentations of a chorale melody in the organ music of Bach. We're going to take a look now at the original chorale melody and the chorale prelude. And as we look at the chorale melody, I could ask you if it's an example of a rhythmic or an isometric chorale. And you would say isometric. And I'm going to play it. Now we're going to look at Bach's setting of it. And the notes that are in red are the exact notes of the chorale melody. So you can see there is a lot of embellishment going on here. So I'm going to play the first phrase of the chorale prelude, and you can listen for the chorale melody. Of particular interest in this prelude is the influence of the French ornamentation as seen especially in the upward resolution of suspensions and appoggiaturas, called porte de voix. And I'm going to point some of those out to you. Let's look at that first phrase again. Upward resolution. Upward resolution. So those are some examples. When you look at the text of the chorale, the first verse addresses our deepest need and despair, while the second verse turns to God for rescue and comfort. Rather than using specific motives to represent the text, Bach's setting embraces an overall sense of intimacy and comfort by balancing the fluid coloratura in the melody with a steady pulse in the accompaniment. Now let's go ahead and turn back to the Choral Prelude. The opening four notes of the unembellished chorale tune is found in parallel thirds in the left hand, as well as inverted in the pedal in the opening measure. So here we go. Looking to the left at the chorale, and then take a look here in the left hand. So he takes those opening notes and puts it in the accompaniment. And then in the pedal, he inverts it. And if you look at all of these circled, look, there it's in the pedal now. And then up here, it's in the alto. Then here in the pedal part, and then in the manual, altered a bit. Anyway, it just keeps on going. And so you have the first four notes of the chorale melody permeating the entire accompaniment of this chorale prelude in its original direction as well as inverted. This pattern serves as a motive throughout the entire composition, as you've just seen in the left hand and pedal parts, and definitely provides a sense of continuity. In Ah Holy Jesus, Brahms moderately embellishes the melody of this Passion chorale while providing a rich harmonic accompaniment in the lower parts and pedal. Let's take a look at the chorale and the chorale prelude. To your left is the chorale. Now we're going to look at the chorale prelude. The melody of the chorale is notated in longer note values, so it's going to sound slower, and that's because there's a lot of activity underneath the chorale melody. I'm going to just play the chorale melody, and you'll hear how it's just slightly embellished. The profundity of the text is represented by the rich harmonic palette rather than specific motives. Nonetheless, the diminished fifth or augmented fourth, otherwise known as a tritone, are found regularly throughout the setting. So I'm going to play a tritone for you. How does that grab you? The unstable quality of the tritone sets it apart from other intervals. It has been considered a dissonance in Western music from the early Middle Ages through to the end of the Common Practice period. That would be around 1900. The tritone has historically been referred to as the devil's interval or diabolus in musica, and has often been used to create a feeling of unease or evil in music. For example, Bach used the tritone to characterize Judas in the St. John Passion. Brahms' frequent use of the tritone in his setting of the Passion Chorale is significant, as the text speaks of our treason and crucifixion of Christ. So let's just take a look at the tritones. They're listed, or they're highlighted here in purple. So I'm just sort of guiding you through this with my cursor. And you know, it's just not accidental. I mean, look at that. There are tritones everywhere. If I just isolate them, for example, in the pedal, it sounds like this. And then down here. And then if we were to continue at the bottom, so that gives you an idea. Another motive that is worth pointing out, although it probably has no symbolism associated with it, is a three-step note stepwise pattern that spans a third. And it's stated clearly at the beginning as well as the end. And I will show you that. So here, that's in green. So stepwise, going up a third. And you, similar to the tritone, you just see it everywhere. And it's included in the embellishment in the melody as well. So let's just take a look at the second page. I actually didn't bother marking all the places it happens here, but I did want to show at the end where it comes back, kind of like there's a prelude and a postlude. And then resolving. In Bach's O Lamb of God, Pure Spotless, the Choral Prelude is divided into three sections representing the three verses of the chorale. Let's take a look at the chorale and the Choral Prelude. Here's the chorale. Now look at the Choral Prelude. The first verse begins with an introduction using the opening phrase of the chorale that leads directly to the melody, which is placed in the soprano part. The notes that are in red are the notes of the chorale melody. Now notice it's just the opening notes that you see here in the introduction, and they're repeated here in the bass clef. Let me just play that opening section for you. And I stopped where you heard the opening phrase in the left hand. So it leads seamlessly to the soprano line where the melody is heard in its entirety, and it's just embellished a little bit. Flowing eighth notes serve as the accompaniment underneath the melody. And then here is the second verse. You can see the melody is in green this time. And it's not so obvious because you have a line above it, a line below it, so it's sort of buried in the middle, but it sounds like this. And the figuration around it becomes a little bit more lively. Now, in the final verse, the melody is placed in the pedal with a four-part fugal counter-subject in triplets above it. The triplets take on a lyrical quality above the first two phrases of the chorale, and it sounds like this. Of course, you won't hear the pedal part because I don't have any pedals here, but here is this fugal passage. orchestration changes from that lyrical quality to almost a hammer stroke quality for the third phrase. And you can see that starts right there. I'll just play a little bit of that. And here we go. The most striking and symbolic moment appears at the text. I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit. Else hell had triumphed over us. That is, had Christ not bared our sins for us on the cross, hell would triumph over us. And it's in this passage that Bach embarks on a very stark chromatic passage that isn't like anything else in the entire piece. And I'll play just a little bit of that. Very dramatic. And then the final phrase of the chorale stays in the pedal part, and the text is, "Thy peace give to us, O Jesus." And there's just this outpouring of joy, almost in a cadenza-like style in the manual. So I'll just play a little bit of that. And then the piece just ends very triumphantly at the end, and you'll have to hear that in the context of the organ rendition.